We know that the Marvel Snap patch at the end of January will not only be bringing with it downgrades for a number of cards in Series 4 and 5, but it will also be coming with a balance patch. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about the cards in Marvel Snap currently that I'm hoping get some balance adjustments at the end of the month, starting with the poster child for needs balance adjustments in Marvel Snap, and that is Leader. We know more changes for Leader are coming. Ben Brode kind of insinuated in his post that they were just knocking a point of power off of this card while they figured out what to really do with it. I think there's a ton of directions they could go to make Leader more reasonable, but I'm really hoping we see a change to Leader's rules text and not just a simple stat or cost adjustment in the upcoming patch at the end of the month. If you want to see what some of my ideas are for ways that they could change Leader that would make it more reasonable, I'm going to link a video in the description down below that I did a little while back titled 7 Ways to Fix Leader, rather than rehashing all of those here. Galactus is a card that I've kind of gone back and forth on as to my opinion regarding it as the format has matured with it in it, and I think as Galactus decks have become fully optimized in recent weeks, this card could only be described as toxic. It almost feels like Galactus is incapable of generating a good game of Marvel Snap, regardless of who is winning the game that it's involved in. In the games that Galactus wins, it generally wins in a big manner, often completely invalidating what the opponent's deck was looking to do, since it changes the dynamic of the game from playing to 2 lanes to playing for just one of the Galactus players choosing. And in the games where the Galactus player loses, their deck basically just doesn't work. They flop around and they play some mediocre cards, and they can't generally even dream of winning a game where Galactus didn't blow away 2 of the locations in play. Similar to Leader, I don't think a simple stat adjustment will fix any of the problems with Galactus. If anything, it likely makes them worse. In the recent balance patch, they took Galactus from 3 power down to 2, and in a lot of situations, this power reduction actually ends up being a buff for the Galactus player. The reason for this is Galactus players do not want to have priority going into the final turn of the game. If they're going second, it means their Shang-Chi can flip up and destroy any large units their opponent is playing on the final turn, or it means if you're playing a large unit of your own, such as a Null, for example, your opponent can't Shang-Chi, Enchantress, or Rogue, you're a massive threat that is almost certain to win the game. I think there's a few different directions they could go with changing Galactus, but the simplest of them might be making Galactus have even less power, but then giving it the rules text, you always have priority if Galactus is in play. I don't know that this change would necessarily solve the feel bads or quality of gameplay that Galactus generates, but it would allow the opponents to have counterplay with a wider range of cards, making things like Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Rogue always meaningful things to be doing when you're playing against Galactus. Wave's an incredibly powerful card. At the base level, she can let you play a 6-drop on the 4th turn of the game, and she can also stop your opponent from playing a bunch of cards out on the final turn of the game if you play her on turn 5, which is a really potent effect against a lot of the decks in Marvel Snap that want to make 2 or even 3 plays in those final moments of the game. On top of both of those things, though, Wave also has a really strong interaction with cards that reduce their cost, such as Death and She-Hulk. Basically, how cost reducers work with Wave right now is they get set to a 4 cost by Wave, and then they apply their cost reduction after the fact. Meaning if you've destroyed just 2 cards over the course of the game, Death will cost 2 energy after you've played Wave out. I would actually love to know in the comments down below, do you think the way Wave works with these cost reducers is reasonable, or do you think it's something that should change? They wouldn't even need to change the rules text on Wave or any of her stat lines. They just update it on the back end, so Wave basically always wins when it comes to reducing costs. We see this in other games that I've played. Magic the Gathering has a card called Trinisphere, which just always sets the cost of things to 3, and I think Wave would probably be a more reasonable and fair card if it just said, okay, things cost 4 because I flipped up last turn. Cosmo probably takes the #1 spot for the least interactable card in Marvel Snap. It shuts down on reveal effects at its location for the entirety of the game. Normally, the way you deal with an ongoing effect like this is you use Enchantress or Rogue, but because those are both on reveal effects, Cosmo says, no, those don't work here. Cosmo is a card that I think you could go in one of two directions. I think they could just reduce its stat line meaningfully, dropping this down to 2 or even 1 power. It still probably sees play as a powerful hoser effect, but it just doesn't provide the same presence in the path that you're playing it to with that line. Another direction they could go in is they could update its text box. You could make Cosmos effect temporary or make it affect the whole board the following turn. There's a lot of different things they could do and play with that, so it just still has its effect, but in a less permanent manner. I would love to know in the comments down below, what are your general thoughts on Cosmo? Do you think it's reasonable as is, or do you think it should be adjusted in some way, shape, or form? Aero is probably one of, if not the best card in Marvel Snap right now. She was brought down to 7 stats in the most recent balance patch, and I think she can limbo even lower than this. I think Aero probably still sees an incredible amount of play with 5 or maybe even 4 points of stats. I've heard some people say things as extreme as they think she would be playable with 0 stats, which I think is not quite the case, but I think we can definitely go lower than 7. Aero's primary effect is the way she dictates where cards end up on the board, and she's kind of still close to on rate as far as 5-drop go with 7 points of power, and I think you should definitely be getting something below rate in terms of the stat line for as powerful as Aero's effect is on the average game that she's played out in. If you compare Maximus to other 3-drops, his stat line just crushes absolutely all of them. I think the most direct comparison to Maximus is Swordmaster, which only has 6 points of stats as a 3-drop with a drawback, and Maximus should probably be brought in line with that, I would think. The downside that Maximus has is actually completely irrelevant if you play it out on the final turn of the game, like we frequently see decks doing right now. And if you're playing something like, say, Leech to wipe the text off your opponent's cards, you can just kind of play this card out on curve, and it doesn't really matter because you're going to be taking power away from the extra cards that you're giving your opponent momentarily. At the end of last year, both Mysterio and Angela lost a point of power, kind of leaving a toss-up for what the best in-class 2-drop would be for most Marvel Snap decks. Well, the metagame has definitely solidified, and Scorpion is indisputably filled that slot. Now, Scorpion's effect generally means it's providing 2, sometimes 4, 5, or even 6 stats over the course of the game, depending on how many of the power-reduced things your opponent ends up playing out. And God forbid you end up Scorpioning something like a Brood or a Mr. Sinister that would have used their power multiple times, giving Scorpion an incredible amount of value. Similar to Mysterio and Angela, I think Scorpion should probably just have its power shaved off by 1 to bring it more in line with the other 2-drops that people are playing still on occasion. I think there's a good chance Shuri is actually one of the best cards in Marvel Snap right now, and when she downgrades, I think we're going to see a whole lot more of her on the ladder as she becomes more accessible to more players. An on-rate stat line for a 4-drop in Marvel Snap is typically 8 points of power for 4 resources, and Shuri provides way more than this in the average case scenario. Even if you're only doubling up something that's small, like Vision on the 5th turn, you're getting 9 points worth of stats, 7 on the Vision and 2 on the Shuri, and God forbid you be plunking on something massive like a Red Skull. In that case, you're getting 17 stats out of your 4-drop. I think Shuri's probably fine if you just take her power and cut it to 0. I think that brings her more in line with what you're looking for these kind of combo enablers to do. Maybe that makes her problematic with Mr. Negative, but I think that's one you just kind of got to risk with some balance changes in this game, and if she breaks with that, you reconsider doing something else in the future. I think I do like her as a 4-drop though, because playing her 4 into 5 on curve enables a lot of neat decks in the metagame. She just shouldn't be adding stats herself to the board, I don't think. Somewhere close behind Shuri, Darkhawk is one of the other better cards in Marvel Snap right now. At a minimum, they should probably get rid of the base point of power that this card has access to. When you mix in Rock Slide and Korg and Absorbing Man, adding cards to your opponent's deck, Darkhawk is often double digits worth of stats for just 4 resources. I think you could also make an argument to go something a little bit more extreme with this card. We saw things like Devil Dinosaur go through a few different iterations in Marvel Snap Closed Beta, eventually ending up as a 5 energy card with base 3 power. I think Darkhawk templated in a similar manner, 5 energy, 3 stats, and then getting bigger for cards in your opponent's deck probably leaves it still playable, but makes it a lot less obnoxious, especially in tandem with powerful cards like Zabu. Speaking of our friend from the Savage Lands, Zabu, I actually don't think I would like to see changes to Zabu in this patch. You'll note that two of the cards I suggested changes get made to are Shuri and Darkhawk, and those are some of the best things to be doing with Zabu. And I think I'd like to see how this card plays out in a world where those other two really powerful 4-drops aren't as strong as they were previously. I think especially if they considered increasing Darkhawk's cost so it was no longer reduced by Zabu, a lot of Zabu's strength would be removed in terms of making bigger numbers, largely making this just a good utility card to play with disruptive effects like Spider-Man and Shang-Chi and Enchantress. Finally, a card that's contentious whenever balance gets talked about Marvel Snap right now, Silver Surfer. I think the people that say it's as simple as changing Silver Surfer to be +2 power, similar to Patriot or Cerebro, are overlooking the fact that Patriot and Cerebro are both ongoing effects, which means not only do you get to play those cards out proactively, but you also can double their effect with Mystique, neither of which are things that we can do with Silver Surfer. I think in a perfect world, this card would give like 2.5 points of power per card, but that's really not an option. I think if other changes happen to cards that I suggested in this video today, for example, if both Cosmo and Maximus got made worse, that would incidentally bring down Surfer's power level, but it may or may not bring it to a good spot. Overall, I don't think I would shed any tears if Silver Surfer was brought down to just +2 stats, but I'm also not entirely convinced that it's incredibly necessary, especially if other 3-drops, like I suggested, get brought down to be more in line with other things in the game. What card or cards would you like to see balance changes for in Marvel Snap? Did I cover them in this video here today? If not, let me know in the comments down below what changes you think perhaps need to be made and why. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown and insights, be sure to snap that like button to help this content reach more people at no cost to yourself. And if you happen to be new here, thanks for making it all the way through to the end of the video. You must have enjoyed something about it, so consider subscribing to the channel. I post Marvel Snap thoughts and tidbits like this, as well as deck highlights here 7 days a week. I'd love to see you back again. Happy snapping out there, folks, and hopefully see you back again real soon.